Well, welcome to the Teach for the Bay, third annual Teach for the Bay on this morning of Friday, September 30th, with the theme, we are here, we are the ones we have been waiting for. Welcome. Our workshop here today is the urgency, challenges, and joys of teaching ethnic studies. Once again, urgency, challenges, and joys of teaching ethnic studies. And we're excited to be part of this conference and to be able to share in community this workshop with you all. And so I'll go ahead, I'll introduce myself. My name is Malinalli Villalobos. My pronouns are él, he, him, and his. And I'm gonna be one of the moderators for this session, along with SJ. And SJ, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello, good morning. I'm SJ. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm a ethnic studies teacher, student, and a teacher also at a middle school in the district.
Thank you for that, SJ. And just so when we start off, we'll start off with just wanted to share with you all that by 2030, all California high school graduates must complete an ethnic studies class as a graduation requirement, and that we aim to help our state prepare for this reality. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. And for those that just joined us, good morning and saludos. And we are recording this session to document this space, and we would be able to share it with other participants later on. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. We're going to start off with Professor Brown, Professor Dorian Brown. Professor Dorian Brown has been teaching for 25 years since the fall semester of 1998. He has spent 23 and a half of those years at St. Louis Community College in St. Louis, Missouri, came to CCSF, City College of San Francisco in 2021 and became the chair of the Department of African American Studies of the same year. Professor Dorian's research interests are post-World War II African American history with an emphasis on the cultural arts. And we have, go ahead if you want to introduce yourself first, Professor Brown, and we'll go ahead and introduce the next panelist as well after that.
Oh, well, I mean, I thought that was a great introduction. No, we could just move on to the next person.
Okay, thank you. And now we're going to introduce Dr. Ish. Dr. Ish, our amazing Dr. Ish is here. Dr. Ish's bio, she's a community scholar who learns with our stories, including schooling stories from all our relations. Dr. Ish, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure, thank you. I had a very short bio to give to you, Malinalli, so thank you for repeating that one sentence. But I thank all the people and whose land we are on, the Ohlone, and I'm grateful that we are able to gather here to share our stories with each other and learn with and from each other. I've gone through formal schooling, K through 12 in Chicago, where I was born, and in California through middle school and high school, and then finally going to school, the universities of Madison, Wisconsin during the US war in Vietnam, and I learned a lot there about politics and schooling, formal schooling, as well as learning from being a labor community organizer for over 30 years, raising a family, and then going back to school to UC Berkeley and to Stanford and getting more formal education. Finally realizing that learning with and from community members and community scholars is my true journey and my true education. And ethnic studies certainly is part of that. Thank you.
Thank you for those words, Dr. Ish. And we appreciate you. And our final panelist that we're going to have present today is Professor Beatriz Herrera. And Beatriz Herrera is a community organizer and instructor in the Latin American Latinx Studies and Women and Gender Studies departments. Professor Beatriz holds a master's degree from UC Berkeley in Latin American Studies and has spent over 15 years organizing immigrant and communities of color in San Francisco and New York. Professor Beatriz Herrera currently serves on the executive board for the CCSF Faculty Union, AFT 2121. So, Beatriz, would you like to introduce yourself?
I think that was really good, Malinalli. Thank you. It's so good to see everyone this morning.
Well, thank you all to all the panelists that are present here and sharing space with us all. I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself a little more in depth. My name is Malinalli Villalobos, and I'm a current student at City College of San Francisco. I am part of the Ethnic Studies Social Justice program at City College of San Francisco. I had the opportunity to take an array of classes within various departments, including interdisciplinary studies and the studies that have been intersecting in my educational journey. I have graduated from City College of San Francisco as well, fortunately with a few community degrees, such as ethnic studies, our AAT, transfer associate's degree, Latin American and Latinx studies, critical Pacific Islands and Oceania studies, anthropology, and an array of other degrees. And as also being part of this educational journey, I have been an activist and organizer at City College of San Francisco, which has led me to be part of the student leadership on campus. And I currently sit on the board of trustees, which is our school board, as the student trustee representative. This is my second re-election year as a student trustee, and I'm just excited to be here. In unison with that, or parallel to that, I just recently transferred to Cal State University, Sacramento, or Sacramento State University, as a transfer student. I just completed my 5 weeks in the Ethnic Studies major department as an Ethnic Studies major with the emphasis in Chicanx Latinx studies. So I'm a commuter student, and so I'm navigating that educational journey myself. And I would like to take this moment to also, if you want to add a little more on your journey, SJ, this is the time.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So yeah, again, I'm SJ. I've been in different colleges since 2013. I started going for elementary education, and I took about 2.5 years of education in that track. And I was feeling really frustrated because I've always been like a night school student and worked and taught with youth all through my education. And I felt like taking elementary ed classes was like in some ways distracting from the actual youth that I was working with rather than like supporting and uplifting. And that felt really contradictory to me. So I took a little break from school and I came back to City College in the spring of 2020. Yeah, in the spring of 2020. And I started going for the Ethnic Studies Social Justice degree. And I found that so far through that time, I was also working in an elementary school teaching K-5 garden and science curriculum. And I found that going for that degree and the things I was learning in my ethnic studies classes were way more tangible to what I wanted to teach with my students and work with my students. I was working at a Chinese immersion school at the time and learning about the contributions of Chinese migrants to the irrigation systems that we have in the Central Valley, and able to teach about that, which was way different than reading Charlotte's Web and other books written by white men that really didn't connect to my students or me. So now I'm working in a middle school. I just transitioned to teaching middle school this year, still going to school at City. And I'm really excited to continue to learn and to teach my students and learn with my students. The school I'm working at has a track that there's a lot of newcomer immigrants at the school. And so I'm kind of learning how to work in that community and best support language learning. And yeah, so that's me. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much, SJ. And for those of you that are just joining us, saludos, good morning, welcome to this panel and workshop session titled Urgency, Challenges, and Joys of Ethnic Studies. And with that being said, I would like to just start off with posing a question for everybody here, and you could share with us in the chat or as we're continuing this workshop. What do you see some of the challenges in your prospective schools and communities and in this journey of ethnic studies being present in many years to come? What is it that you foresee as a challenge? And maybe we could digest some of these concerns, and maybe you could share it and come up with solutions. But we're excited to be here this morning, sharing with you all and learning from you all. We're going to go ahead and start with our panelists. If our panelists, would you like to share on some of the issues that pertains to ethnic studies, or some of the pros of ethnic studies and just your background in ethnic studies? And we could go ahead and start with Professor Brown.
Okay, so I'll actually, starting with a little bit of my path to ethnic studies may get with, actually dealing with the urgency and challenges, essentially. I am born in Cincinnati, Ohio, but I grew up in East St. Louis, Illinois. Okay. If you don't know about where I'm from, you can Google it, or there's a really good book you can read called Savage Inequalities. And that book, the first chapter of that book deals with my high school when I was there. Okay. So basically went to an all Black high school, but and we didn't have a Black history class or anything of that nature. A lot of my education, whatever, as far as African Americans were concerned, came from home. My mother is a dancer. My mother danced with Catherine Dunham for a number of years. Her love is African dance. As a matter of fact, one of her teachers early teachers lived out here, and he just transitioned recently, Zachariah Juf. So there were a lot of books that I had at home that I remember picking up reading as a kid, didn't necessarily know what they were about, but things like E.A. Wallace Budge's, the Book of the Coming Forth by Day, which people refer to as the Book of the Dead. I had all kinds of, the autobiography of Malcolm X, all that kind of stuff was around my house. And so, going to college, I went to the University of Illinois as an undergrad, and I'm in history. I always liked history, so I majored in history. And there really wasn't a lot of African history or Black history that was really kind of happening. I kind of pieced together my degrees. Even, in going into grad school, I was really kind of piecing together, making sure I took certain classes that were of my interest, where they didn't really have any sort of set curriculum for, an African-American history degree or, that kind of thing. So when you look at my diplomas, they all say American history. I'm considered an Americanist, right? But my area of expertise is African-American history. And that was basically just because of how I grew up and the people that I was around. And I also, my secondary area of expertise is African history, because growing up in that environment, I always was aware of the links that existed between Africa and, quote, African America. So I will say that being very new to California, just within, the last couple of years, this whole idea of ethnic studies calling it ethnic studies is really very new to me. But one of the things that I see as a challenge to all of this, particularly as we look at and It's mandated that, you know, students have to take one ethnic studies class, and, you know, now they have to do it in high school, is that I would hate for ethnic studies to become a check mark. This idea that, you know, it's a check mark on your diploma, it's a check mark on your degree, it's a check mark on your certificate. You know, there has to be some kind of way. I think that the challenge has to be some kind of way of making sure that it becomes something that is commonplace, right? That is integrated into all of the curriculum, so that, you know, so you don't have that, so you don't get that syndrome of, you know, the I have a Black friend syndrome. Time somebody talks about racism, oh, I'm not racist, I have a Black friend. Oh, I'm not racist, I took an ethnic studies course. You know, that kind of thing. So I think that one of the challenges is to really be able to have these courses integrated from the, you know, starting from kindergarten. I remember just earlier we were talking about, I think, the plenary. I think they were saying that it was about, you know, why is ethnic studies important in kindergarten? Well, you know, I'm an example of why ethnic studies is important from the womb. Okay. And it's something that needs to be integrated throughout the schools, and not just made a check mark or whatever. So that's for me, that's what I see as one of the challenges. Again, being new to California and really kind of being on the outside looking in, that's what I see and what I'm kind of afraid of at this particular.
Thank you. Definitely thank you for that, Professor Brown. I think that's a very important factor, that now that it's a mandatory discipline and a mandatory curriculum, we don't want to be boxed in to a box where check, we've done it, next, we're not next, we're here to stay, and it's going to continue in your journey, not just in education in itself, but where it's very important in our communities. And our communities are not check marks. And with that, Professor Herrera or Dr. Ish, would you like to share?
Dr. Beatriz.
Would you like me to go, Ish, first?
Would you please?
Okay, sure. So, you know, there were some things I wanted to share, but Professor Brown really inspired me to thinking about my own academic journey as well. So I'm kind of like, okay, where do I begin? But, you know, I was a kid growing up in New York. My parents were immigrants from Mexico and Puerto Rico. And like a lot of Latino kids in New York specifically, they sent us to Catholic school. So I grew up mostly in like and around, right, Afro-Latino communities, Dominican, Haitian, Puerto Rican, Trinidadian, Barbados. That was my community that I grew up with. You know, but then when I went to college, I went to a small liberal arts college, you know, and I was like, where are the city kids? You know, the woman down the hall from me, from our dorm, was Liz Hanks, Tom Hanks' daughter. I mean, those were my new peers in college. So I really was looking to find my community, and that's kind of where my kind of activist journey begins. And it was the friends that I made that were from California. It was the Chicanos from LA that kind of helped politicize me. And they're the ones that were like, why isn't there ethnic studies at our school in college? And that wasn't even a question I had asked myself. I didn't even know of ethnic studies as a field at all. And even at the undergraduate level, there were some Latin American studies classes, but that was not ethnic studies, right? Our instructors would tell us Latin American studies was a field developed by the US government to study and surveil, you know, political regimes in Latin America. And so at the time, there was a real split between, you know, scholars that were looking at Latina studies and Latin American studies. There was a split, and the disciplines were not merged at all, right? And so I saw kind of that merging happening, you know, in the years after I was an undergraduate student. So after I graduated, I actually became an organizer. I became an activist. I did a training in the Bay Area that everybody told me about called the Center for Third World Organizing. From there, I was, asked to apply for a position at a community organization called Power. I became a domestic worker organizer for many years. And I went to grad school with a question, like, what does it take to organize Latina women? What does it take to organize immigrant women? And, what about culture? Aside from just training people up in kind of a Marxist sense, what role does culture play in organizing people and getting them engaged and invested in transforming their lives? So that took me down another path, right? I ended up doing my thesis on women's co-ops in Mexico. I was studying women weavers who produce textiles. So that was my project. I came back to California, of course. And then, I was doing electoral work after I graduated, and I was organizing communities of color, engaging them in civic engagement work. And from there, I met some City College instructors who told me, there's an opening. We need a Latin American studies person. We don't know anybody who's getting this degree anymore, right? Because now people are kind of really looking toward kind of the ethnic studies, bigger umbrella degree. And so they're like, we need you, would you do this? And I still remember telling them I'm not a teacher. I'm an organizer. And so, I was shocked to have that experience where, they organized me to teach at City. And it's been such an amazing experience because a lot of the skills are really shared, right? You're wanting to engage people in the world. You're wanting to see people to see themselves as active agents of change. You're developing people's political consciousness. You're connecting the dots between their lived experience and, what's happening at the ideological and institutional level. So it's been a real joy for me to be able to teach and organize. As Malinalli mentioned earlier, I'm still an organizer now within a faculty union, but, I think one of the challenges of being an ethnic studies educator is you're always contesting for power, right? Our disciplines are always under threat. That's true at City, that's true at every school, and this new requirement, to Professor Brown's point, it's like, what does it mean to have this kind of open invitation for students? Of course, it's great to invite, right, K-12 to really focus and spotlight ethnic studies and hopefully center students of color in that process. But as critical thinkers and as critical scholars, we know that it's going to be very, very complicated. So I'll just stop there for now.
Thank you for sharing. As one of your students, I would like to say that you are a wonderful teacher. What your class was, I think my second semester at City College, and I really enjoyed it. I just looked over one of our assignments that you had us do about writing a story in the format of the Zapatistas. I just found it on my computer, and I was like, it brought me back to that class and all of that learning. And so I'm really grateful to have been a student of yours. And I really liked what you're sharing about this connection between organizing and educating. And I think that there are so many similar skills. And I think that educators are in some ways organizers intentionally and unfortunately sometimes without intention, right? And so this question that brought you to your next part of your schooling, right, about how to organize workers and women, I think it starts right in kindergarten with those classes and with that learning and with like you said, connecting the dots of our lived experiences, and that hopefully that is what, as Professor Brown was sharing, like that it's being integrated, so those dots are organic and natural and not just like a checked box or something that isn't very coherent or making sense to people. So thank you for your sharing. Dr. Ish, would you like to share?
Thank you. I'm going to write on your words of teachers as organizers. Many of my colleagues from my organizing community and labor work, I have said, Ish, you did such good work organizing in the community. Why did you become a teacher? And precisely what you said, that teachers are organizers. They have to be organizers. There is a challenge for teachers, usually in this current decade, for the last few decades, where we've got classrooms filled with maybe 30 students and one teacher, which is committing violence against our communities, because students are put in classes like check marks, as was stated, and that those check marks or numbers that we give to students dehumanizes them. And most of the organizing that has come about in the last 3 or 4 years by teachers has been around making smaller classrooms so that the teacher-student ratio is better, and that teachers can relate to our students, the community members that are in our classrooms that we have the privilege to work with, as human beings with full ethnic richness and knowledge that they bring to the classroom. And that's what I love about ethnic studies, and that's been the challenge, is how I can learn, because that's something that keeps me motivated in teaching ethnic studies, is I learn so much with and from the students that choose the ethnic studies courses that I facilitate. And so thank you, SJ, for those words, because that's what it's all about. And counting beans, or counting chopsticks, or counting any kind of data-driven, which I believe is good, and I side on qualitative, meaning our stories and the richness of our stories, rather than extracting one piece of our lives and then quantifying it and saying, see, we have succeeded. I have one colleague who was teaching a middle school, and I was a resource teacher. And the way the school retained him was that he was able to make, what do you call it, negotiations with the students. All right. He had 30 students from all different countries in his classroom, right? Because they were all English language learners. And you're talking about all different languages in this beautiful, like, gathering of all this, community knowledge. However, he was required to go to the math department at the same time the English department was having their meeting, right? And he couldn't be at 2 places at once, right? And so what he was able to do was negotiate with the students during their recess period, because many of them were involved with marijuana and other forms of having to deal with stress. And he said, well, I'm not going to fib on you as long as you, do your homework, try your best in getting these tests done, etc. So he negotiated with them. And as a result, the school numbers, as far as, again, counting those chopsticks as being, just went up, right? Because all these students who brought down those test scores were all of a sudden, they were doing really well. And the principal, unbeknownst to her, that this was going on, took pride in saying, see what we're doing? We're doing really well at the school under my leadership, not knowing that it takes those kind of organizing strategies to actually work with and respect the students, and knowing where the students are coming from. And that's the challenge of ethnic studies, is having, in this period of time, in this point of history, where we have many, many challenges, not only the pandemic, which gave way to the online courses that have shown that made these classes accessible to so many students. At the same time, not allowing the kind of organizing that teachers are privy to in many respects, to work with the communities the students represent and to honor that knowledge they bring. One of the, I don't feel that affirmative action went far enough. That's my criticism, that they again counted our physical visibles. It then discounted, once we were in the school, discounted all the rich knowledge that we bring. And our knowledge was discounted as being primitive, less than, not worthy of academic standards and honors. And the students were pushed out. And that's the beauty of ethnic studies and the requirement, in the respect that we're learning, and maybe in a box-like manner, and I hope that the teachers who are choosing to really love and respect this profession, really honor that by organizing the classrooms with the students, to bring this knowledge into the academy, and then to teach each other, including me, a teacher, because I often start classes with, I'm going to disrespect you because I don't know you. I don't know where you're coming from. I don't know your language, your history. So if you would save my life by teaching me when I disrespect you. Because when I give you an ouchie, let me know, and I'll give you extra points because you are then saving me from maybe a major confrontation on the street when I disrespect someone and I didn't know I was this, by the words I choose, a posture, etc., a look that you can teach me. And most students don't take me seriously because we've had K through 12 training not to question our teachers, right? Talk about power structure in the classroom. And I believe that once they've had me for a couple of semesters, okay, she's serious. I can have courage and raise my hand as long as I don't make up stuff that in fact you're this, you gave me an ouchie, Dr. Ish, because you said such and such, and that's not right, and that's racist, or that's sexist, or that's homophobic. And so that's the opportunity we have in ethnic studies, is to focus on that knowledge that has been made invisible throughout history, right? So anyway, I could go on, and I will stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Ish, for sharing. And it's being fortunate enough to take your class. One of your classes, you do start off with with the disclaimer. I apologize because I will offend you, and if I do, please show me, or so we could learn, so I could learn and not do the same, do it again. And I think that's very important, learning from one another to not let it happen again. And I also like the how you tied in with Professor Herrera's, teachers are organizers. We are organizers. Teachers are organizers in the classroom, and again, organizers are teachers in the community. So they go hand in hand. So this is one of our areas or discipline where it doesn't stop in the classroom. It intersects with community, and community intersects with the classroom. So thank you all for sharing on the challenges of ethnic studies. And if we get shifted into the joys of ethnic studies, the joys of ethnic studies, your passion, your love for ethnic studies, and what brings you happiness on a day-to-day basis, for you continuing this journey in this in this time. So if anybody wants to share, And if not, we don't have to. We could throw in one of our questions that we might have in our chat.
I think we can share, Malinalli. We're thinking for a minute.
Okay.
There's a lot of joys to the work. It's a big question. I can speak as somebody who's teaching in a city college context, and you all will find different joys, whether you're teaching in different systems, different institutions, with different age groups. I saw a question in the chat about teaching TK to 3. I don't have that experience. Like, I would love to engage in that conversation. What does it look like to teach ethnic studies for the little ones? But at least at City College, it's a real joy for me. Teaching in a Hispanic serving institution, which means that, a minimum of 25% of your student population is self-identified Hispanic Latinx. There's nothing like it for me, teaching a classroom that is almost 90% Latino, teaching this community, this population, their own family's history, right? And I asked that question to my class, like, why don't we know? Why don't we know the history of our own people? Like, we don't learn it in high school. That's what they all tell me. We don't learn this in high school. So that will shift, right? That's going to shift in the next couple of decades. Students will be entering the classroom with more of an understanding of grounding. But watching students make those direct connections between their personal experience and what their family went through and what they're experiencing in educational institutions, in the workplace, everywhere in this context, living in the United States is, I think, transformative, empowering. It's why I got my degree in Latin American studies. And I also have had people saying, I'm just naming dynamics in a room. I've had students say, are you going to teach me to hate? Are you going to teach me to hate white people? Like, I've had students ask me that. And my response is, I'm not teaching you to hate anything. I'm teaching you to love yourself and love your community and be an advocate. And I think that, people can be afraid of entering conversations that are rooted in oppression and legacies of discrimination and exclusion. And I think these classes are efforts toward inclusion, right? And they're not just meant for people of color. They're meant for people who want to be allies, people who want to be trained in anti-racism. So, we have a lot of work to do in a country that's, villainizing critical race theory. And California, I think people really look to us for our leadership. I mean, some of the scholars I teach taught in California. I mean, Ansaldúa was teaching in California. Bell Hooks was teaching in California in Santa Cruz. I can go on and on, but we have a responsibility because we live in a place that has made choices to institutionalize some of this field. And so, that's not true of other places. So there are opportunities and challenges, but the work is truly joyful to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I find kind of an everyday joy in just the teaching, particularly since I didn't necessarily want to go into teaching. I was going to go to law school. While I was waiting to retake the LSAT, which is a whole different story in itself, I started teaching a class, and I just fell in love with it. And I think that for me, this, being able to disseminate information, to give people knowledge about things that they may not have known before, is something that I get a lot of joy out of. And I think that what I really get the most joy out of, I think, is when students come back to me later and say, well, hey, that they may not have necessarily understood. I try to tell my students all the time in my classes, look, there's a method to the madness. What you're doing, it may seem like it doesn't fit together, but there's a method to it. And I think my joy comes from oftentimes where students come back later to tell me how they now recognize what it was that I was trying to teach them, how they see these things they've encountered these things in other areas of their life. But, you know, kind of getting to the question about, you know, elementary schools and TK through 3, I think what I always have gotten joy out of is when students come back and tell me the things that they have taught their children from what they have learned in my classes. And how they felt that this was something that their children didn't need to wait till they got to college to learn. So they took that opportunity to teach them now while they were younger, so they would have that knowledge, you know, coming up. So I think that all goes back to, you know, the ideas of the importance of, you know, ethnic studies within the community, you know, each one teach one. And so I think that's important as well. So that's where, you know, kind of my joy comes from. So.
Thank you for sharing. I love that connection of each one teach one, and talking about how some of the pieces might not come together until later, until it's really integrated, what has been integrated into life. It makes me think about also like tying in what Dr. Ish was saying about starting your classes saying, you know, I might offend you and teach me how and why I am. And Dr. Herrera saying that so much of the, like, we aren't taught to have these conversations with each other, to know how to really talk about all of these things. And I think for me, so much of the power of ethnic studies is the curriculum, and also all of the underlying things, right? The dismantling of power, the organizing that inherently goes into it, and the organizing that comes to the community, and teaching the kids and families coming together to have these conversations, and people talking about racial dynamics and having conversations that we were intentionally not taught how to have. And I think that is so critical. Yeah. Dr. Ish, did you want to share for you some of the joys of doing this work?
One of the many joys is being able to connect students in a box classroom into the community, or bring the community into the classroom, and the joy of students having these aha moments when they meet people like Grace Lee Boggs, who is a fantastic community organizer in Michigan, and her work as part of the community there still lives with the community gardens and ways to grow your own food there. And Yuri Kochiyama, whose children, who lived in Harlem with Malcolm X, who's worked together to build grassroots communities and organizations that would teach students, quote unquote, ethnic studies, right? And how bringing students to the Western edition, right? And meeting Yuri but also National Japanese American Historical Society and Marcus Books, and to see in the first hour all the work that has been done in the Western edition that included historically the redevelopment, so-called, which was the urban removal of the Black and yellow, the Asian communities. Then going to Marcus Books around the corner and hearing the story of how Marcus Books can't make it because they're going to be evicted because they can't pay their rent, et cetera, and how both organizations helped each other, and both contain books of that struggle, including books about the Black history in the neighborhood at NJAS, National Japanese American Historical Society, and Marcus Books having stories, the K-3 stories, picture books there for young members of the community, teaching about the history of the Japanese American community who was evicted during World War II because of the U.S. Relocation, or making Japanese Americans, right, prisoners in these concentration camps throughout the United States, which is, again, one of the joys of teaching ethnic studies, is learning so much. I mean, it's like the history of our country has been so hidden and and to have a group of students be co-researchers with me, community research, and let's uncover our oral histories, our oral herstories, our stories, right? And create our own body of knowledge and document and honor each other's stories is so joyous. And I learned so much in the classroom. And to me, that's one of the highlights of teaching ethnic studies, is to learn with and from the students that are in the classrooms. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Dr. Ish, and I think that everybody's perspective on the joy is, I feel that it's your drive, and as a student myself, being able to take Professor Herrera's and Dr. Ish's classes, I see that joy and that passion, and in return, I'm able to share that with my classmates in the spaces that I continue to be at. And even now at Sacramento State University, where I feel that my classmates are learning from what I bring to the table, and it is because of that passion and joy that you all have been able to share with us students. And I know I haven't taken any of your classes, be on that list. And speaking of Joyce, I wanted to share with you that in the chat, we went ahead and share with you a link to our CCSF Ethnic Studies and Social Justice AAT degrees. And so you could check out what we have at our City College of San Francisco curriculum. And these are all classes that we see joy in. And so make sure that you click on that link, save that link, and that's we have a lot of resources there. So I know we all got to share a little bit. I also want to make space for the folks and the people in the community here in this space to ask questions to our panelists. I know there's been some questions in the chat, or some ideas, or some comments, but this is your time to ask our panelists. If anybody has questions, you could go ahead and raise your hand, or at this point unmute yourself, and we'll have that. We'll have those questions. I'll refer back to I believe East Bay, Cal State East Bay. There was a question or a statement saying that they're going to implement ethnic studies at Cal State East Bay through the liberal studies program, specifically early childhood education and teacher prep. Maybe your thoughts on curriculum for TK to third, as Professor Herrera has mentioned, that you would also like to learn how that discussion and to see how that environment is going to play out. But if anybody wants to share or have any ideas.
Yeah, I also wanted, I don't have an answer for that one, but I wanted to see the other people in the room that are people who are watching. If you want to share also, like, how our discussion relates to what you're doing now or where you see yourselves, it would be great for us to know as well. So thank you.
Okay, we'll give our community a little more time to let's see, what are some of the challenges that you all face when teaching ethnic studies? If anybody wants to share a little bit more on the challenges pertaining to this question. I know we talked about challenges at the beginning, but if anybody wants to add to it, or some of the pressing issues pertaining to ethnic studies, which are also challenges in itself.
Go ahead, Dorian.
No, well, it's funny that we were both coming at the same time, because I was actually about to piggyback off something that you said when you were talking about I think for me, what I see is this kind of resistance to all of this. The idea that we've seen these attacks on things like critical race theory and so on and so forth, as if, you know, as if we're teaching hatred in the classroom, as if these are things that people should not know. You know, I remember some years ago, a colleague of mine gave me an article about how Texas was changing its history books to not to refer to slaves and the slave trade as migrant workers. So I think that these kinds of this resistance that we see coming from outside, I think as people who are educated in ethnic studies or in our particular field of expertise, it's easy to tackle those challenges inside the classroom. Like when students have certain beliefs or, you know, that kind of thing, you can give them something to read. Here, read this. Here, read this. Okay, let's have this discussion in class. Let's talk about, you know, your particular perspective. And then we can talk about that. But these other factors that we see coming in from the outside, I find are some of the major challenges, really facing, ethnic studies. Because then when you start having these challenges, these institutional challenges and other challenges that are coming from the outside, from politicians, well, now you're dealing with funding. And so those are some of the major challenges that I see are really those that are coming from the outside, not necessarily within the classroom itself.
Yeah, I can name some challenges in the classroom. So for me, just my positionality in the world, I feel that, I have to deal with a certain level of challenge because I'm a woman, because I'm a woman of color, because I'm a woman of color of small stature. People assume I'm a student. I've been to conferences for educators where other educators will ask me if I'm lost. It's just internalized, right? And so you're walking in with a chip on your shoulder, but also trying to make room for the people in the room, right? So it's all those layers happening at the same time. I think also, what do you do when people are actually actively hostile toward the ideas you're trying to teach? And that's a question that I have around this mandate, right? So if I'm teaching at a community college where some students opt in because they want to learn and they feel connected to the topic, if this is a mandate, there's going to be people who don't want to study this and they're being forced into it. And so then how do you navigate some of those challenging, conditions where you're trying to create an experience of empowerment for marginalized students, and then they're being confronted with opposition from, students who make up a more privileged class, right? So that's real, and I'm seeing that that's a possibility. I think too, as somebody who teaches at City, sometimes, I have students that say, oh, I know this stuff, right? Teaching ethnic studies or talking about, systems of oppression or identities, right? People sometimes can assume this is going to be an easy course because I understand race or I know gender, like I got it, right? But it's really about, connecting the dots, right? Between your lived experience, contestations for power, and giving people more of a profound, a more complex, enriching experience so that, they can, walk in the world as somebody who feels powerful in who they are and what they believe, and what they want to do in the world, right? And I think, yeah, so kind of pushing back on some of that, I'll have students say like, well, I know this stuff. I'm like, okay, so tell me what you know. And then it's like, it's one thing to get it, but it's another thing to explain it. And it's another thing to dismantle systems that are oppressive. Like, do you see yourself as an active agent of change? I think that's part of what we want to encourage. But I'll stop there.
When ethnic studies students get so inspired that they will continue their education at a 4-year college, right? Or a university, that sometimes preparing the students who get inspired and want to go forward is to not get depressed by the academies that they're confronted with, because it can be very seductive to sit in seminars and just read books. And I realized that reading the ethnic studies newspapers, etc., at Berkeley, at Stanford, the language that one acquires and tends to put down community-based languages. And so I couldn't believe that the ethnic studies newspapers couldn't be understood by the people who created ethnic studies in the first place, right? The community folks. And they included the Yellow Brotherhood, the Black Panthers, the Brown Beret, the people who actually gave birth to ethnic studies. The language, and I think it's important that people see the academies, and this is the challenge. When I first came out of the institutions of so-called higher learning, that the students said, Ish, we don't understand the word you're saying because you're using all this academic jargon, right? And I had to check myself on that, right? And so to see that some of the scholarship that we receive, that we're learning another language, and that's all that is, and not to valorize it. I don't know if I'm being clear on this, but my personal experience was that a lot of the ethnic studies scholars that we include and we teach acquired this language and had to acquire this language in order to survive in the academy. And I'm hoping that the students that come through the ethnic studies courses who go on to pursue their BA, their MA, their teacher credentials, and their PhD, that they do not forget that that's just only one language, and don't forget the language that their ancestors gifted them, and to continue to honor that language, and not to make it invisible, and get so seduced by the scholarship that tends to push people in an ivory tower kind of situation. Okay, that's all.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ish. Thank you for those closing arguments, and thank you for everybody for being here in this Urgency, Challenges, and Joys of Teaching Ethnic Studies session. Thank you to our panelists and professors, Dr. Ish, Professor Herrera, and Professor Brown, and to the community here present. Thank you all. Don't forget to fill out the survey that's posted in the chat. Make sure to save that link for our Ethnic Studies, Social Justice, AATs, and other information on our associate's degree. And thank you all for coming. And thank you, SJ.
SJ, did you tell me that you go by Miss Celery as well?
Yeah, that's what my students call me, Miss Celery, because I'm the garden teacher, and I found that it helps me to make connections with students faster to have a silly name. I don't know.
I remember.
Oh, thanks. I was really torn moving to middle school. Like, will I keep Miss Celery? Will they just clown me for it? But I've kept it and it's stuck. I've told them Miss Celery or SJ, and a lot of them chose Miss Celery still, which is like very heartwarming.
It's very cute. It's very cute.
Thanks for remembering.
Thank you all. It was very inspiring.